And welcome, folks, to episode number 377 to the Church Solutions Podcast. My name is Phil Thompson.
And I'm Steve Lacy.
Steve Lacy, the Wildcat Nation today is kind of sad and kind of gloomy.
Yes, it's kind of interesting. I didn't go there, but I've paid for 16 years of tuition there, so I feel like I'm more a part of of U of A, University of Arizona, than I am my own alma mater.
Yeah.
And yes, I did every year. I put together the dream bracket, and it has Arizona facing Texas in the final game, and I did it again this year.
Yeah.
And I thought for sure that, wow,
Yeah.
both of them are really strong, and maybe it'll happen, but
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
hopes have been dashed. They
Yeah.
lost
Well,
first round.
that's too bad. Well, Arizona. Well, in case people don't know, we're talking about the tournament, and Arizona got knocked off again. But anyhow, let's move on to better things. Today's guest, we have a guest today. Today's guest is known for his pioneering work in worship design and guest readiness. He's devoted the last 2 decades to resource development, to training people, to coaching, consulting for local churches, all shapes, sizes, and styles. He's written 10 books, and his latest book is called And/Both. And that's a forward slash
Or
both.
the other way around, Phil. Don't mix it up.
Oh, I
Both
mixed it
and.
up, didn't I? I mixed it up. It's both slash and. So we'll get to that in a moment here. But both slash and. I don't know if that's how you say it, but the full title is Maximizing Hybrid Worship Experiences for In-Person and Online Engagement. So please welcome everybody, Jason Moore, to the Church Solutions Podcast. Jason, how are you today?
I am doing good slash and great.
Okay. I'm sorry I screwed up your title. So both. So when you tell your title, when you say
Yeah,
your title, how do you say it?
just both and. You don't have to
Okay.
throw you can throw the slash in if you'd like, but you don't have to.
All right. So people are looking for it on Amazon or something. Both. So it's called both and then
Yes.
maximizing hybrid worship experiences for in person. All right. So sorry I already goofed things up for you, but don't
That's
worry.
You got
that's
the
okay.
name right.
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, not that it really matters that much. I think you might have an older bio because this is actually my 12th book now. So
Oh
I'm not
wow.
at 10 anymore. I'm at 12 and working
Wow.
on number 13. So
Wow.
it's
Wow.
uh,
That is
things are
that's
moving.
you are really cranking things out here. So well, good. Well, we're glad to have you on today.
Good
Well,
to be here.
I must admit that I really enjoyed reading your book. I normally do audio, but I actually read yours. My wife gives me a hard time because she'll say, I read that book. She's like, what do you mean? You listened to it, right? And I go, no, I read it. But yours
Yes,
are actually physical
audio
print. Go ahead.
audiobooks have been a great gift, for me. I like it because I do a lot of graphic design, media production, and I can both listen to a book and work at the same time. And I can't, you can't read a book and do other work at the same time. So I really like the audiobook thing. It's a cool thing.
Yeah. I used to have in a former life a long commute, and I did books on tape before there were
Oh yeah.
audiobooks, online. And I was a member of the local store and go grab my cassette tapes to pop into my car on my commute, and that
Yeah.
migrated to audiobooks. But yeah,
Yeah. They're
so I
great.
really enjoyed it. So let's
Thank
get
you.
started. The title of the book is Both And. What does that mean for the church? What's the book? What's it about?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, You know, uh, so many churches found themselves forced online when the pandemic showed up, and while we had some early adopters out there, all the late majority all jumped in about almost exactly 3 years ago. To the week.
We
Yes.
We
remember
are
it
in right now.
well.
Yeah,
Wow, it was two
it,
days ago, as
I know,
March
isn't it?
15th went down in
Isn't it?
infamy for me.
Yeah, isn't it crazy? And the reality is that a lot of folks just put a camera in the back of the room and went about business as usual. Um, Although there was this period of time where, because there was no one in the room, we brought the camera up a little closer and we began to talk to people at home and create an experience of worship where people in their homes online actually felt like they were worshiping with us. And the reason I wrote the book is that as people started to come back to the building, I think that we started to lose sight of the fact that we were creating an experience for people at home especially during that lockdown period. And so what I've been trying to get people to do through the book, and then I've done a lot of training and consultation work in both and is to create an experience where people both in the room and online feel like they are equal participants. That we don't have the people in the room acting as the studio audience for the people at home, and we don't have the people at home acting as spectators for what we're doing in the building. And so I'm a big believer that we don't want people to watch worship at home. We want them to worship online. We don't want them to be viewers. We want them to be participants. And so the book aims to help churches of any size, of any technical savvy, of any budget, really reimagine the experience of worship so that no one feels like an afterthought. We're all a part of it.
So a lot of churches have, I mean, you look at the title and you think, wow, sounds like a lot of work, right? You want me to do both and where I was willing to, get rid of this streaming thing. Actually, one of the interesting stats that we've come across recently, and you're right that we had maybe 20% of the churches streaming, and then COVID hit and everybody was streaming. But still, churches are still streaming. Some have moved away from it. So why do both and?
Well,
if my staff's limited, and why do both?
Yeah.
Why not?
Well, for me, I start in the very first passage of the book by quoting the Great Commission. That we are to take the gospel to people everywhere, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Of course, it's a little harder to do baptism online, but we have the opportunity now to really live into the Great Commission in a way that I think maybe we didn't before. I'm working with churches of all sizes, but I work with a lot of small and medium-sized churches. In fact, in my world, I work a lot with the Methodists, and I work with pastors who have 2-point charges. They're the pastor of 2 small rural churches, and they're really using this hybrid to reach more people. And so, one story I heard early in the pandemic was that a church that had about 50 people weekly in person were now regularly reaching about 550 online through their hybrid ministry. I know one church here in Ohio where I live who broadcasts from their living room every week, and they have 1,500 people that are regularly participating. They are giving, they are doing online Bible study, all of those kinds of things. And so I don't think that hybrid was just a Band-Aid to get us through the pandemic in a time where people couldn't be physically gathered, but really it is the new wineskin for the time that we live in today. Our core values haven't changed, but the way that we express them, the way that we do worship, has to look different than it did prior to the pandemic. And I'll just address one other thing that you said there for a moment, because I had a pastor just recently say to me, Jason, we're thinking about shutting down our online worship. And I said, well, why would you do that? And he said, well, we want people to come back to the building. And I said, friend, while I appreciate the sentiment and the thinking behind that, if my favorite restaurant stops offering delivery service, it doesn't mean I'm going to get in the car and drive to the restaurant every time I would like to eat the food from that place. I'm going to find somebody else that delivers, because in the rhythm of my life, which has changed the last few years, I don't always have time to stop what I'm doing during the day, get in the car and drive to where this restaurant is. But I do have the opportunity. And it's not that worship should only be convenient, but what I'm saying is there's some shifts that have happened in our world that I think we have to not bury our heads in the sand, but really embrace. And so just simply turning off your hybrid worship isn't going to mean people come back. And the final thought here is that I've encountered so many churches that have told me they've had more guests or visitors or new people in the building since the pandemic began and they worshiped online than they had prior to the pandemic, because people can now check us out, decide if they like the flavor of what we're offering, and then migrate to the building. So I guess that's a long answer, but that's why I think we got to continue.
So you mentioned one thing at the beginning of this. You said, so churches stuck a camera in the back of the sanctuary, and you have one of your chapters talking about reimagining worship, and you talked about book to film, and this is kind of along the heart of the whole book that I
Yeah,
got out of it is that to talk more about what the book to film idea and
sure.
those that maybe currently just have a camera in the back of their sanctuary.
Yeah. Well, I think most of us would admit that if you've ever read a book and you've gone to see the film adaptation, most of us don't really like the film as much as we like the book. They often do a poor job of sort of translating the story, or they leave out our favorite part or whatever. There are some examples where the book is actually better, or the film is better than the book. I think Forrest Gump was, from what I understand, not a very good book, great film. Jurassic Park, that was a good book, but really, really great film. Willy Wonka, there's some of those movies that you hear. But I talk about in the book the idea that if we are going to reimagine what we're doing and move from this idea of book to film, you have to adapt the story some. You have to adapt the way you do worship. So practices like offering and prayer and sacraments, how do we do communion and all those kind of things? We have to reimagine how we do those things. We have to consolidate. Uh, we have short attention spans. And while we can go for an hour or more in a physical space where we're all gathered together, oftentimes people who worship online aren't going to sit for an entire hour. They're not going to sing all the songs. They're not going to participate in the same way. So, one of the things I talk about in the book is the idea of creating a curated version of worship. So, maybe you don't have every single
Yeah.
piece in the online portion. Go ahead. It looks like you have a
No,
thought there.
no. Continue on here.
Okay. All right. I thought maybe you had a response.
I was
Um,
getting distracted. That's
that's okay. And so consolidate, adapt, and then reimagine. Like, we've got to figure out what are our rites and rituals now that we aren't just in the building. And I think that too often, what I've been saying more recently, and I'm not sure that this made it into the book, but I continue to teach on this, is that there are three ways that people participate right now. Right now in the building with us, that's the first way. Right now at home with us, those who are streaming online. And the third way that we don't give enough attention to are those who worship with us later online. And there are a growing number of people who now don't worship on Sunday, but might worship later on that day because they work on Sunday or maybe on Monday, or I might find something a month after you preached it because I put a keyword into Google or into YouTube, and all of a sudden it brings up your sermon and I'm experiencing it then. And all of our language tends to favor the first group, those who are physically present in the room. So I don't think that you have to have, you know, dollies and boom arms and 5 cameras and a crew and all those kinds of things to be effective in your hybrid ministry. I've seen churches just use a smartphone and intentional language to make people feel like they're part of it at home. So what I mean by the language is that we'll say things like, let's stand together for the reading of scripture, or let's stand together as we sing. Well, the people in their living rooms are not standing in that moment. If I'm in my hotel room on vacation but worshiping with my church at home, I'm not going to stand. But I think it's just a little indicator to folks who aren't physically present that when you say, let's stand, let's sit, that you're not thinking of them. So what if you instead use language that's more like, if you're here in the building, I'm going to invite you to stand. If you're worshiping with us online right now, we're going to invite you to find a posture that will allow you to fully participate. Or we might say, let's stand in body or in spirit. One of the things that I just did a consultation today with the church online with their online worship, and they were doing what we call in my tradition the benediction, which is like the blessing at the end of the service. And oftentimes I hear in a benediction, as we go from here today, and it's like, well, not everyone's here. Some of them are there. So what if we were to say, as we go from here or wherever we are today, go in the, and then give them whatever that blessing is. Remember that there are multiple ways that people are participating. And I guess the last one I would say is when we invite people into things like prayer, if you'd like to pray with someone, you can come down here to the front. We've got someone that would love to pray with you. If you're worshiping with us online, you can put your prayer request in the chat. And if you're worshiping with us at a later time, you can drop your prayer request in an email and someone will pray for you, or even reach out and pray with you this week if you'd like to. So let's start to really lean into the idea that worship, I guess my new way of saying it is that worship is here and there and now and later. It's here in the room with us, wherever we're at. It's there wherever people are worshiping online. It's right now as we're doing it on Sunday or whatever day you worship. And it's also later when people encounter it online.
And what you're really saying here is, pastors and people on the platform need to recognize the online
Yes.
viewers, right? They need to recognize them and keep them in mind,
Right.
whenever whatever they're doing, talking or whether they're asking people to read a scripture together. It's really keeping it's expanding the fact that, hey, there's more than just 100 people or 200 people in this building. There's
Yes.
people outside this building watching us right now, or maybe later.
Right. And as going back to the idea of just being a camera in the back of the room, when your camera's in your balcony or at the very far back of the room and someone is just a speck on the screen and you can barely make out facial features, you don't feel much connection. And one of the things we have to reclaim that I think many of us did during the lockdown portion of the pandemic is that we had the camera up close. So I've been trying to get people to think about not thinking of the camera as a camera. It is not just metal glass and microchips. It is a portal into the experience for people who are worshiping outside of that space. I just posted something this week on Facebook about watching the Oscars and just being very aware of how, if you watch during the Oscars, first of all, most of the shots are like waist ahead. They do have wide shots, they do have shots of the crowd, but most of the shots are like from waist ahead. The presenter, the people winning awards, Jimmy Kimmel, all of that. And if you see some of the shots, there are actually some shots where there's like a crane that's kind of booming around them, and you see that there's actually a camera right in front of the podium where the mic comes up, and there's a teleprompter there and all that. And the people in the room are aware of that, but they're also aware, the people that are sitting in the theater are aware that the program isn't just for them. So nobody's lamenting that camera up there. They recognize that there are, I don't know how many hundred people in that theater, but then there are millions of people, I would assume, watching that program. And the analogy I use in the book is that it's like football or any professional sporting event. We've got the people in the stadium who are doing the wave and they're buying the hot dogs and Cracker Jacks and all that stuff. And you have one experience in the stadium, and then there's a production crew and commentators, and it's the same game that's happening in real time that is thinking about two different ways that people participate. So you don't have to be super slick. You just have to remember, as you said, that you have an audience that's bigger than just the people that are physically with you.
Yeah, that illustration really jumped out to me. I mean, there was a couple of things. One was you talk about people are not going to get up in the middle of your service and walk out. They're less likely to do that than they are to get up and run to the fridge when they're watching online. So there's different levels of distraction and ability to move about. But then you talked about how the football one really struck me, and the illustration about somebody gets injured on the field. There's not a camera hovering around for 10 minutes while they're trying to take care of this guy on the field. It's the focus is on the online audience, and so they cut away to announcers talking or do these other things or go to commercial or whatever. So there's a really special treatment for that online audience that I think people that are streaming for churches right now don't really recognize it. I think they kind of take an attitude of, here's a window into what we're doing. And, if it doesn't fit what your environment is, oh, well, because this is what we're doing. We're just letting you watch. So That was a really, really key thing that I thought a lot of churches could really take away.
I call that alternate moments in the book, that when you have something happening in the room that doesn't translate to online, you might create an alternate moment or an alternate experience for those who are at home. So for instance, when it comes time for communion, you may have a line of 100 people, 200 people, whatever, who are all coming up to receive their elements. Well, if I'm sitting in my living room, I don't want to just watch 3 or 5 or however many minutes of that happening. I am gonna go to the fridge, or I'm gonna tune out, or I might even turn it off and forget to turn it back on or whatever. But if you show a video during that time that keeps people engaged, or I know one church where the pastor isn't that technically sophisticated that he could play a video, but what he does is he actually has his mic on in the room that goes to the speakers in the room, and then he has another mic on that is for the online broadcast. So they kind of mic it separately. And when the time comes for him to invite people up to receive communion, they turn off the mic in the room and they keep the one on for the camera. And he's got other people that are serving communion down front. And he looks directly at the camera. And for that entire time, he will say, for those of you who are worshiping online with us right now, we're engaged in what we call Holy Communion. And he goes into the explanation of the ritual, and he watches what's happening, and he'll just basically, he'll have some ideas in his pocket. So I remember the first time I ever received communion and what that meant to me. And years ago, I went on a trip to the Holy Land. And so he's got all this stuff ready. And when the room is done, he will say, okay, well, we're going to re-engage here in our worship. And then they'll turn his other mic back on and say, let's pray together. And then the online congregation and those in the room are now reunited in the experience. But for that entire 3 minutes, he was doing something for those who are worshiping online that kept them engaged while other things were happening in the room.
We've been beating this drum for a long time. I remember when I was the church online guy at Steve's church. We had me in a separate room, and we had just an older switcher, and so we switched from the video in the auditorium to a camera in front of me, giving announcements that were relative to the people online, talking about donating online and prayer request online. And today it's really not that expensive to do something like that.
Yeah.
It's the prices of equipment and stuff have gone down quite a bit, and it's really not too hard to switch over to somebody else, like you're just saying. But what you mentioned there with the second microphone, that's interesting. That's definitely very innovative. Just to have a different microphone. I hadn't thought about that before, but that's something that maybe some of our people could use.
Yeah. Well, it's the first person I'd ever heard of that was doing it, and I thought it was pretty brilliant too. And he was like, it didn't really cost us all that much more. They had a second mic, but it's a creative way to do things.
Yeah.
So you also talked about in the book, and I was going to get to the kind of the second half of the book as well, but you talk about attention spans in person versus online, and creating packaging what you're presenting for the online audience. I think you had some stats that I think I read in your book and in other books. What's the optimum length for the online viewer versus the one coming in person? Tell us more about that.
Sure. Well, years ago, I think it was actually late 2020. I was invited to speak, excuse me, at an online event for online church planters, and this was still when we were, in the heart of the pandemic, near the beginning of it, really. And they brought on a gal named Nona Jones. Nona, for a long time, was the director of faith-based partnerships at Facebook, now Meta. She's actually moved on to a new position, I think, with the folks that at Life Church TV. I think she's working with the Bible app now. But anyway, Nona had access to the Facebook analytics and stats and all that stuff. And what they found was that, at least at that time, the threshold was about 40 minutes. And after 40 minutes, people would turn it off, regardless really of what was happening, whether that was in the middle of the sermon or prayer time or whatever. That's about as much as people could handle. She actually said in the training that I was speaking at, but listening when she was teaching, I was taking notes and learning just like everyone else. And she said the sweet spot is really between 25 and 35 minutes for online worship, if you really want to engage people in the whole thing. So in my book, I talk about 3 different ways to do hybrid. I call it pre both and worship, real-time both and worship, and what I call post both and worship. Pre is the idea that you might pre-record your online worship experience, and never the twain shall meet. So you're not actually going to stream your worship in person. You're going to pre-record. So you're going to preach that sermon on camera. I suggest less in the way of music, because what I've found in doing seminars for the last 3 years is most people say they don't really sing all that much. I'm not saying leave out music completely, but maybe do one abbreviated song or two very short songs or whatever. But people aren't going to participate in the same way after the fact. So pre-record your sermon, some music, and basically edit a 25 to 30 minute worship experience online, and then you can do what you always did in the room and have it go as long as you'd like
Right.
to.
And schedule it at the same
Yeah,
time as the.
yeah, that's what a lot of churches that I've worked with have done, is that like we worship at 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. online, and that video goes live at 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. The second way then is what I call real-time both and worship, and that's the idea that you're live streaming. And in this model, I even give them a way of doing like a 30-minute pocket within an hour-long service. So what if you don't bring your online audience in until maybe the last song? So you're going to sing 4 songs or whatever. You're going to bring them in right before song number 1. So you might say, hey, we want to welcome those of you who are worshiping with us online. And that comes partway into that service. You sing one song together. The middle of the service is basically broadcast. So the song, maybe the prayer, scripture, sermon. And then after the sermon, what if you said, hey, if you're worshiping with us online, thanks for coming today. We're going to continue on in our worship here in the room. And then at least you get a chance to say goodbye to them before you sing another song and offer, some announcements or whatever you're going to do. So basically create an hour-long service with a 30 or 40-minute pocket in the middle of it in real time. And there's a whole lot more I get into in the book on how to do that. Yeah. And then the last model is what I call post both and worship. And that's the idea that and this might work really well in a smaller church that doesn't even have internet in the building. You have the cameras in the room, or a camera in the room. You record, you do what you do for the live experience with cameras running. You remember to talk to those people, even though you're not streaming it at that moment. And then after the fact, you post it. And you can even edit that down to be just a sermon and a couple things. There's a church I write about in the book. I always say their name tells you everything you need to know about them. Their name is Farmersville United Methodist Church. So they're in the middle of nowhere. They don't have a big budget. They don't have a lot of equipment. They do worship 9 a.m. live in the room. They record it. And then after worship is over, they immediately take the sermon, maybe a song, a couple of announcements, do a very quick, very rough kind of quick edit, and then they upload it, and it's online by 11 a.m. So you can either come to the 9 in person, or you do the 11 o'clock online, and you don't even have to worry about live streaming and all the challenges that come with that, or having a big crew, that kind of.
And so, and all 3 of these products are going to be that condensed, built for online viewing, right? It's the same kind of thing. It's they're 25, 30-minute service, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one other thing, and I can't remember if I wrote about this in the book or I've just been talking about it after I finished the book. But I've also been encouraging churches to think about, as a next phase of what we're doing, creating a curated experience of the what you're doing as a live stream on Sunday. So take the entire hour and pull out a few pieces and edit that together. And what I've been encouraging churches to think about is to, instead of calling it a series, which is great language for the church, but not very great language for outsiders. When I watch a television series, that's the entire thing. Stranger Things is a series. Name whatever your favorite show is. That's a series, right? But what they do is they do seasons and episodes. So what if we took a 6-week series and we called it a season, and there are 6 episodes in that season? You can take what you've already done. I mean, you could have preached it a year ago, and take out the sermon and take out a couple little pieces that set it all up. You could even record a new intro, outro, and put together a 25-minute episode. And that means that if somebody finds you on episode 3 and they're like, man, this was so good, I'm going to go back and watch episode 1 and 2, and I want to watch the next few. And then I guess the last thing I would say here is that I think it's also okay for us to do that as an entry point. And at the end of your 25-minute experience, say, hey, if you've never worshiped with us in person, we worship every week, and we worship for a whole hour, and it's a little bit different experience, but there are other people that you can meet. We have a great community. We have a great time together, and we would invite you to come be a part of that as well.
Good. That's good
So
stuff.
there's pros and cons with each one of these options.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's depending on the church and what your investment capabilities are. The pre-services, obviously you're going to need to, or the pre-recorded one, you're going to need to pre-record everything, pre-record the message, and then edit it and put it out. So yeah, there's you talk about it in the book, all the some of the details of maybe this didn't work for you, then let's consider this other one.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, good deal.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So, guys, we're out of time here, but we need to have you back on again, Jason, if you'll.
I'll be happy to come back.
We can move forward here. So, the book is Both and. Got it right that time, didn't I?
There you go.
Both and Maximizing Hybrid Worship Experiences for In-Person and Online Engagement. Jason Moore has been our guest today. Jason, how can people get a hold of you?
Well, I'm at midnightoilproductions.com. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/midnightoilproductions. I'm on Instagram, Midnight Oil PROD, I believe. I don't think I can get all the way to Ductions. But those are all ways. And I guess if you'd like to email me, you can email me at mail at midnightoilproductions.com, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have or help if I can.
All right, good deal. Great. Awesome. Well, this has been really good. And I think a lot of people get a lot out of what you've just said here. And it sounds like a great book. I have read it, sorry, but
that's okay. I haven't read it either.
Yeah. Okay. All
I
right.
read yours and Nona Jones, both books. So yeah.
All right, so we're out of time. Folks, thank you for being with us. And Jason, again, thank you for spending some time with us today.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, appreciate it very much. Steve Lacy, thank you as always for your input.
I'm glad to be here.
All right.
It's one of my favorite topics. This is a good one.
Yeah, it is a good topic. It's a very important topic, too. And maybe next time we'll have you on, we'll talk a little bit about the future. Jason, maybe you can give us some insight on that. So, folks, most of all, thank you for listening or watching to the Church Solutions Podcast. Be sure and subscribe to us. And wherever you get your podcast, just look for Church Solutions Podcast. We've been doing this for a long time. We'd love to have you as one of our subscribers. Give us a rating. And if we can help you in any way, you can always reach out to us. support@streamingchurch.tv, and we'll be happy to help you. So that's it for today. We'll catch you next time on another episode of the Church Solutions Podcast. Please take care of yourselves and each other.